Good morning. As Carl already mentioned, I'm Sam Melcher. I'm a senior at Frederick High School, and I don't remember the first time that I came to this congregation because, well, I was a baby at the time. My parents brought me to UUCF as a baby and as a toddler, but sometime around then we stopped coming to the congregation for various reasons. I didn't have much religious structure growing up. My parents sort of left me to do my own thing religiously, which in some ways is the most UU thing they could have done. However, when I was about 10, my dad decided that it might be a good experience to try UU again. So he brought me and my younger sister Ella to a sermon. I don't remember what the sermon was on, but I do remember that I was bored. Enjoying a UU sermon takes more intellectual energy than most fifth graders can easily muster, though that sentiment may be challenged now, seeing all the young faces who are going into middle school just a few minutes ago who are nonetheless here. So perhaps I was a particularly unattentive fifth grader.
No, you
Anyhow, it was another 4 years before I took another crack at Unitarian Universalism. In 8th grade, I started getting more interested in religion, and I talked to my dad about going to some sort of house of worship somewhere. My dad knows a decent bit about religion, so when I told him what sort of religion I was interested in specifically, he recommended either a Quaker meeting or a UU congregation. At the time, I didn't know much about either, but Unitarian Universalism sounded cool, and all I knew about Quakers were that they called each other friend and had oatmeal. Since then, I've learned considerably more about both faiths, and though I have nothing but love for the Quakers, I think I made the right choice. There are a lot of ways that UUs and Quakers are similar and a lot of ways that we're different, but my favorite definition comes in the form of an old joke. It goes, "What's the difference between Unitarians and Quakers?" The answer? Quakers know they can't sing. I didn't realize that we have the choir here today. You guys were fantastic. That was more a jab at those of us who generally sit in the regular congregation. But this isn't a stand-up routine, and I've already digressed enough. My understanding of Unitarian Universalism consists of more than a few jokes. But that understanding took some time to develop. It began in 8th grade when I started regularly coming to UU on Sundays. My dad had learned his lesson 3 years before and figured it was best not to throw me directly into another sermon. So instead I started going to the teen youth group, and I loved it. And that spring, I helped to put together a youth sermon on hope. I remember 4 years ago, standing in this exact spot in front of the congregation and talking about the legend of Pandora's box. After the youth sermon, I continued going to the youth group, but I heard stories from my dad about Reverend Carl's sermons, and I was curious. So, in my freshman year of high school, I decided to come to the sanctuary instead of the back room. I don't remember what the sermon was about, but I remember that I was intrigued. Since then, other commitments and the shifted circadian rhythm of a teenager have ensured that I don't make it to every service. But when I do, I'm always glad I came. I'm proud to call myself a Unitarian Universalist, and that identity has been influenced heavily by this congregation, but it was also influenced by a world religions course I took last year. Forgive me, I'm getting over a little bit of a cold. I liked my teacher of the world religions class, but he taught very heavily from our textbook, which emphasized the big 5 religions: Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism. Other major religions like Sikhism, Shinto, and Baha'i all got barely a passing mention, so I assumed correctly that our little faith would go unremarked upon. Because of that, I picked Unitarian Universalism as the subject for my final research paper. The paper quickly became about the individual histories of Unitarianism and Universalism going all the way back to the Arian heresy, plus a large section on deism thrown in just because it sort of fit. I found all sorts of information about Unitarianism, such as the fact that in 1822, Thomas Jefferson predicted that Unitarianism, quote, will, ere long, be the religion of the majority from north to south, I have no doubt. As we know, that didn't exactly work out, but it was just one of many things I learned about Unitarianism, which stood in contrast to the relative scarcity of information on Universalism readily available online. Luckily for me, I found an incredible article on Patheos.com called Why Universalism? Loving the Hell Out of the World. And that article helped to establish a basis for many of the portions of my essay that dealt with Universalism. Only after writing the whole thing, when I went back to do my citations, did I notice the author of the article was a one Reverend Carl Gray. So I have to thank Reverend Carl for helping me, without even realizing it, on an essay where I was a bit in over my head. Understanding the history of our faith helped me to appreciate it much more, and it has served to ground my religious identity firmly within a long tradition. Even before then, but especially now, whenever anyone asks what religion I am, I always say, Unitarian Universalist, to which they always say, what?
Yep.
I try to explain a quick history of the name, what UUs are like these days, and what I believe personally, which is confusing to them why it's not the same thing that everyone believes. And it's a precious few whose eyes don't glaze over by the end of that. People who actually get Unitarian Universalism are the exception rather than the rule. So I have to act with that in mind. I took English 102 at FCC last semester, even though I'm still a student at Frederick High, and for some reason in one of my papers, it seemed important to explain something of my personal philosophy. I would have normally said that my philosophy has been shaped by Unitarian Universalism, but I figured my professor probably wouldn't know much about UU. Instead, I wrote that it had been shaped by liberal Christianity, classical philosophy, and Buddhism, which is all true. However, I had assumed wrong. And if anyone knows Unitarian Universalism, it's my English 102 professor, Professor Megan Gregg.
Yeah. We're everywhere.
Who I only realized was Reverend Carl's wife after I had already finished the class. It really should have come as a surprise to me, considering there can only be so many Jewish people with the last name Greg and Frederick, but it was. And the final paper I wrote for Professor Gregg's class was about the philosophy of suicide in relation to the podcast S-Town. And I sent that paper, with Professor Gregg's comments on it, to Amherst College as part of my application. I have since been accepted to Amherst College and committed there, and I'll start there in the fall. But again, I have to thank Professor Gregg so much for challenging me in that particular way to produce a piece of writing of which I am truly proud, and which I honestly believe helped me to get into Amherst College. Massachusetts has always been a stronghold of Unitarianism, and despite the town of Amherst having only 38,000 residents, it has a 125-year-old congregation that I look forward to attending while I'm there. All the same, I intend to continue coming to UUCF when I'm home on breaks and not working, because Unitarian Universalism, and this congregation specifically, has shaped who I am, who I try to be, how I live my life, and the direction of my future. Thank you.